at this painting over here, and I'm realizing that it's very muted, like the colors are very muted, but there's so much, it's so bright. Like there's so much energy coming from that painting. None of the edges, there's no straight edges. Well, not really, no, there's no straight edges anywhere. And it's like, it's almost like a surreal brightness to me. Is that what you were intending for that? Like I'd love to know what was in your mind when you were doing that.
Well, to me, in this particular painting, the color and the shapes were equivalent to spatial experiences, right? So the color came first in this particular piece. That olive green is almost iridescent, right? Mm-hmm. That's oil with medium. But I actually saw that type of shape and that scale. And I saw that, I chose that color specifically for that shape. The edges were me kind of painting within an area of the canvas that I'd seen previously. And then the actual configuration, the edges, were the result of me kind of stopping when I had realized it was close to what I had seen in my mind. Right, the initiative, that was done first. These other shapes came in response, and colors came in response to that one on the edge. And in fact, I painted this painting, and it was one turn to the left. I painted it vertically.
Oh, okay.
I hung it this way because in arranging my show, I had put it down, and I said, it works that way, I love it but this to me has more to do with the idea of those shapes, which are expansive and kind of ephemeral, but very, very present in the surface, right?
And they really are on the surface. That's the impression I get. They're very, there's not a lot, you're not going into them too much.
Sheer.
They're very sheer, almost like under a microscope when you're looking
especially
at
the green,
image.
that yellow green is very sheer, translucent.
There's nothing else on the canvas but that. The difficult part was after I had that shape there, how do I decide what these shapes are and where they are? But in my mind, I had this type of configuration as a starting point, so to speak. What I was inspired by were the colors, and then how I put the colors on were directly related to the kind of color that was there. Like the red-orange, I had found these oil paints, these Williamsburg handmade oil paints. Ooh. And I picked a different brush for each color, right? Because it allowed me to apply it differently. So that's kind of squares. Those are very angular brush strokes, right? In the red. This is much more loose and kind of unformed almost. So that was a difficult part of staying in the original modality, if you will, that I had. It was difficult to maintain that when I went to the other colors and shapes. There was no problem with this. That happened almost in one moment, right? Anyway, after I saw those three things stated, then I said, yes, I had kind of at least connected with what I envisioned in the first place.
My experience of this when I saw it for the first time on Friday night was like my breathing changed. Like there's somehow, I said to Maris, who I was standing with at the time, that it was like an invitation to inhale somehow. There's, because of the space in there, I actually felt my breathing change. Like I felt rounder and bigger in my breathing just by looking at the painting. And I found that quite interesting as a response, because it wasn't like, oh, I like this painting or whatever. It was like I started breathing differently. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. That's great. My body responded to this spaciousness. That's all that's how it came by.
And it's effervescent.
Well, that was a proper response.
Well, it was an interesting one.
It was felt one, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So one question I have is, because of the variety of sizes of work, what is, how does that work for you? Like when you say, well, okay, this is gonna be little and, you know, cause there's a number of smaller works and then like some extraordinary big ones like that. I mean, for me, that's not enormous, but it's pretty big, right?
Mhm. So your question is, why do I choose to do
Yes, yeah,
works of different scale? That's a good question, and I think that the fact is I'm working with the same scale all the time. I don't change the scale of what I'm doing, but I change the size. And frankly, it has to do with, it's quite pragmatic. Because of my studio and my studio functions both as a teaching space and a studio space. Ideally, if I just had a painting studio, I might work at a certain size, a certain large size, all the time, for a period of time. But because of energy and because of pragmatic concerns of space, I'll have something in mind that size, but literally I can't do it that size because I'd have to reconfigure everything. So I work on something that is more intimate, but with that scale, if that makes sense. So to me, I'm always working on the same scale, but I'm using different sizes to achieve it. And that's a challenge in a way, because to work on a smaller scale and maintain the sense of space or the sense of spatial relationships is a challenge, right? If that answers your question.
It does, yeah.
Also, you know, in another practical sense, do I want to make paintings that are larger than 4 by 5 feet that cost over $10,000? And in Victoria, do I have a lineup of people who can write a check for $10,000 without blinking? The fact is I don't. Now, last year I finished a commission that was 5 by 15 feet. That wasn't $5,000, it was way more. But that opportunity presented itself for a private commission. The Wu-Li painting at the Gatehouse is 24 feet by 13 feet. That was not 5,000 either. It was more like 60,000. So it doesn't matter to me what scale. It's up to me how I work and what realm I'm working in. The Wu-Li, or the Prelude painting for the hoarding at the Atrium building was 500 feet, 500 running feet of painting. I remember a conversation with how do you price that? And the construction manager said, well, it's $5 a square foot. And I'm going, okay, that was 2008. Now, I don't usually think, what painter does, like, do you paint by the square foot? But in that regard, it was a construction fence. The fact that the client was willing to, pay me money for the vision, let alone, because it would cost a similar amount probably just to make the fence. So the art really was something value added, so to speak. And so I've seen myself that I'm able and I enjoy taking something at one scale and then the same attitude, the same vision, making it much larger and still enjoying it and having fun and being playful with it. I don't think I could do those things unless I had a sense that I have a purpose, whatever scale it's at. I want to enjoy the creative process and I want it to be rooted in what I'm interested in.
Polarity. Because one thing I find satisfying about your work that I've seen, I'm sort of aware of the working together of the mind and the soul, or the visceral and the cerebral, right? Like I see, we've talked about separating out intuition, but to me, I think that duality is satisfied in my estimation by what you're doing. So I'm wondering, what I see in this work, I sort of see red-orange with this kind of yellow-green. I think I see them in all the paintings in a different way. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing that kind of duality of color, roughly opposites, right, coming together. Mm-hmm. So I'm really getting at a question. The question is, are you aware of working with duality?
Yes. Yeah. I think that to me, this is the best answer I have is the duality is a fact. I'm not a realized person. I'm not a guru or somebody who is, completely clear without any didactic or any good and bad or right and wrong, right? I mean, I am just a mixed up individual person. However, I think I navigate between the cerebral and the expressionistic or romantic with my intuition. I trust my intuition to shift gears, so to speak, or function cerebrally when it's called for. When it's not, when I'm asked, in a sense, called to abandon structure or abandon concern for where and when and how, I give into it. So I think it's that, whatever I encountered early on when I was 18, whatever it was that just came upon me, it wasn't something I didn't go to school and say, I think I'll think about how am I going to paint? What is this painting thing? I had no idea because I didn't have any painters in my family or artists. I had musicians. So I was just raw material for whatever is out there. My first encounter with painting happened to be in abstraction. I've never literally had a class on how to paint an abstract or anything to do with abstraction, but that was my natural response to the idea of how do you paint. And because of that, I was fortunate enough to have artists, teachers around me who recognized something that I didn't know existed. So I've trusted my instinct, I would call it my intuition, in relation to all these large ideas about what is painting, what is composition, what subject matter, what style, all those, kind of eternal issues that everyone struggles with. I've been lucky enough to have an experience that's kind of pushed me forward. So that would be my answer. I intuitively shift, within those realms, cerebral, romantic, expressionist. I would like to make a painting, when people that, what kind of painting would you like to make? I would like to make a painting that appears to be inevitable. Like, to me, trees are very inspiring because when I look at a tree, I don't say, is that a tree or is it a Buick? Is it a car, or is it a house, or is it a piece of wood, or is it a person? The tree is utterly in every molecule itself. And from my point of view, it has a powerful presence. It's life-affirming in a way. So I keep saying to myself, before I move on, I'd love to make a painting that has the same presence as a tree, that looks inevitable. It looks like where people look at it and say, yes, it is there, it is what it is. And to me, that's very powerful. Because we like to take things apart, don't we? If you take a tree apart, it's still a tree.
I've noticed that when I look around with the paintings, you have almost an equal amount of paintings that are very smooth in terms of how they're worked into the canvas, and then others which have a lot of texture, like purposeful texture. And I'm really curious about that.
Isn't that the
I'm
same
just-
polarity? Like,
Oh,
is
maybe
that
is.
Is it?
Yeah, like quite a long time ago, actually 1971, I started squeegeeing paint. 1971. I was doing my graduate, my third year at Otis for my MFA. And I still remember very vividly stretching a 6 foot by 6 foot canvas, raw canvas, taping a 8-inch plaster spatula to a 3 foot piece of 1 by 3 board, taping it because there were no tools, and mixing up, like yogurt cups, like two, whatever, how many liters it is, of acrylic polymer emulsion and phthalo blue and orange, cat orange, they were like quarts of paint. And I walked around, I put the canvas on the floor, and I walked around the canvas and poured orange in blobs along the 6-foot edge, all the way around. While that was drawing, because it took a while to do that, I took almost a gallon of phthalo blue mixed and poured it at the edge of every edge, the 6-foot, and took that squeegee and squeegeed through the orange. I did that all the way around the canvas. And then in the middle, I did a field of colorgraphic marks, right? And at Otis, we had I talked to my advisor once in 2 years. But we had a visiting artist from San Francisco. I think he was from Holland, maybe. Anyway, I left. I did this painting, and I said, "Oh my God, what is this?" I mean, I was just blown away by myself. Like, this is what I've been trying to do. And as an aside to this, drawing was my first encounter with art, right? So drawing was never a problem for me. I mean, not to say that all my work was brilliant. It's just it was never a problem. I could just do it, and I was totally at one with it. And that's the first painting I did. Well, this is like drawing. Once I realized I could paint like I drew, I had no problems. I mean, in that regard, life to me is a mess, is a huge difficulty. Art making has never been a difficulty. And when I allow myself to do the art, there's no problems for me. So, make a long story short, I did this, and I left that painting in my studio. I could barely, I was so enamored with it, and so impressed with myself. Like, how did that happen? Like, this is it. This is how you do it. So, I went back, and I found a note taped to that painting, because there were no sticky notes in those. This is literally a piece of square paper with a 3M tape or something. And this is the best advice I got at Otis in graduate school for 2 years. And the note said, "This is it." And I barely knew this artist. I barely talked to him. But that was his comment. That meant incredible. Imagine if you had done that, and I felt the way I felt, and I saw that note. And he didn't talk to me, but he just left that note. So I don't know what that means, but to me,
What a validation for
it
you.
just said,
like
okay,
confirmed what your internal
someone else
thing
in the
was.
entire world, in all of Los Angeles, saw something that I felt.
Yes.
And that's all I needed.
Let's remember that person saw something that you felt.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, that person felt it.
They felt it as well. Yeah. And that was in my graduate show.
But what a kindness and appreciation for a person to even do the note. Because
Absolutely.
they needed to communicate that. They
Yeah.
felt it
He felt moved
to communicate that.
to
But
do that.
That's the connection, I think, with the arts culture that I think in our changing social environment, that it's harder to find that.
Mhm.
You can find it sometimes if with really good people, but I rarely encountered it in my 4 years of art school and university. It would, there was being validated, and I think that there were things. There was 2 people, Glenn Howard and Pat Martin Bates, once took a look at one of my journals, and she took the time to really look through the pages, and she says, "I want you to keep in touch with me." I didn't, but because I moved on, but that I can remember that just her saying that after looking through that was just give me I feel teary thinking about it, because those moments, they're really, really important.
Yeah. Well, I've tried my best to pay it forward in that way,
Yeah,
in my
I know you
teaching
do.
with
Yeah.
people, and without being phony about it, my purpose is to help support people's own emerging art practice, whatever that is. Whether I like the style, or it's not about their personality, but if they have that same aspiration to do authentic work for themselves, that's to me worthy of support. And that's priceless. It's not a matter of who pays the most or who's advanced or beginning. It can
Yeah, I
help
could
individuals.
totally get coming and seeing that note, how that would have made you feel. I
Mhm.
really get that sense of how that would have been one of those transformative moments where when you're validated in that sense, because
Yeah.
these things are very amorphous. It's really hard to put your finger on what's going on when you're, or how much meaning it has, or if there's self-delusion involved, because there's plenty of that for everybody. So
Well-
a moment like that would have been stellar.
So it's invaluable.
Yeah.
I remember my friend, my teacher, mentor, and then my friend, Andy Fagan. I went to his celebration of life. He died of cancer in 2007. Actually, the same year, I think it was 2007, maybe later, that Fleming Jorgensen passed away. Because I was going to this celebration of life in Fallbrook, California, near Oceanside, south of Los Angeles. And I'd already committed to that, and then Fleming had passed away, so I couldn't go to his celebration. But when I was there, I was the furthest student. I mean, most of the people were from California. There was probably 100 people there celebrating Andy Fagan's life. And I got up, and I could barely talk because it was very emotional, but I kind of screwed up my courage. And this was outside in his property. It had 2 acres and next to a pool, and there was a microphone, and his son had spoken, and I said, okay. They asked if anyone wanted to say anything. So I recounted this story to this crowd of people who loved Andy. And I think I was 19 at the time, and I was in his life drawing class. And he said to me, he was kind of standing in back of me, he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, Bill, yes, Mr. Fagan, would you like to learn how to cast bronze? The Italian method. I said, yes, sir. He said, okay. And he literally, over my shoulder, handed me his keys to the studio. And he said, here's the keys to the studio. And then he handed me a tool that Italians use for melting wax to make sculpture. Handed me that, then some sculpting wax. And he said, literally, he said, here you go, make something, we're casting tomorrow. He said, I'm not paying you, but you can hang out, and you'll learn. So I went to his studio. That night I made a sculpture, a figurative kind of homage to Rico Lebrun and, kind of abstract figures. And I learned the lost wax process. And then I cast, I was assistant that summer. I had bronze dust in my nostrils all summer, grinding bronze, because at 19 years old, I was in Rico Lebrun's studio, finishing Andy's pieces for a show at Palos Verdes Art Gallery. He called them Joeds. They were Gio Pomodoro and Edna, his wife. He called them Joed. And these pieces were 150 pounds of silica bronze that looked like gold mirrors after we finished them. My job was to grind them down and then buff them with rouge they use for bicycles, to grind things down to make them literally like jewelry. And then we sprayed 7 layers of black lacquer and clear coat on a piece of aluminum so that we mounted these sculptures this big of silica bronze, gold bronze, and they looked like they were in black pools of water. And then and I got to help mount this in Palos Verdes Art Gallery. At the same time, the curators from the LA County Art Museum were coming to borrow work from Rico Lebrun's studio that we were in for his retrospective at the LA County Art Museum. Imagine a 19-year-old in that milieu, and artists around you say, grind that better, do the work. This is where it happens. And if you go to school, pick everybody's brain and be responsible for your own work. Do your own stuff, but do what they tell you. And that's what I did. His partner, or his colleague at El Camino, Willie Suzuki, I was in Drawing 100 at 18 years, right out of high school, right into El Camino College. And I'm in beginning drawing, never taken an art class before. I took one art class in high school. And Suzuki substituted for my teacher who was sick the second week of class. This is beginning drawing in junior college. And he had a sewing machine and put a turntable upside down next to it, and he said, draw the negative shapes. Okay. I took up charcoal, I'm drawing my head off, and he comes up to me and he goes, Bill, I'd like you to stay after class. And I thought, oh my God, I've screwed up already, I have to stay after class, you know. So I did, and he comes up and he says, well, Bill, and luckily he had asked my friend Jim the same thing. He says, Bill, I'd like you to register for advanced life painting. I hadn't taken life drawing, let alone life painting or a painting class. That's a level 300. And I said, well, Mr. Suzuki, I don't have any prerequisites. He said, that's okay, I'll write a note. So I went from beginning drawing to advanced life painting in 1 semester. I'm thrown into a group of people, there's 30 people. I still remember Mr. and Mrs. Renger, who had escaped the Nazis on a hay cart in Yugoslavia. He was working on a painting that was 300 pieces of wood in a moire pattern. That was one thing. She was working on a series of drawing paintings from the Depression era. And one guy was painting a 10-foot by 12-foot reproduction of Larry Rivers' The Dutch Masters. The first class, Suzuki turned off all the lights, had a stage set up in a beautiful Swedish model with the projection, with the slide projector of Raphael's Madonna on her. He said, paint this. So I was, just swimming in this. It's just, I was amazed. One assignment was 25 self-portraits in oil in 1 semester. So I started doing all this, and then we had a critique. And this is the weird thing, because I'm still teaching, right? Still trying to help people. And I had literally 1 art class before this. So I'm there in the critique, and Mrs. Renger, somebody puts their work up, and I go, they're going, well, Suzuki's encouraging dialogue. Right? They say, well, what are you guys? And I go, well, that area there, that's not quite, it doesn't match, And I'm looking around, people are actually, oh, they're listening, and they actually agree with what I'm saying.
Is this a class?
Yeah, come on.
Come on in.
So at that point, I kind of got in touch with, well, actually, according to Suzuki, I was saying something that was intelligent and meaningful to other people. And then he suggested to me, maybe you should think about teaching. I said, no, I can't do that. So I never thought of it at that time. But that's kind of like where, for me, a lot of what I'm doing now started.
I hope I was okay the other night, but then I had too many thoughts. I do, I'm always aware of the fact that alcohol can affect